Hello and welcome to the Fireforge Leader Podcast, where I will share lessons forged in the front line of leadership. Today's episode, I have an old friend and colleague. His name is Dr. John Ross. And just to tell you a few things about him, he is a best-selling author of two wonderful books, both of which I've read. He's a public speaker, a subject matter expert in the maintenance and reliability field. He's also the owner of Maintenance Innovators, a global consulting firm. And he's also the creator of three individual certifications. One is a storeroom manager certification. The next is a certified storeroom technician. And then finally, a certified reliability engineer program. And most importantly, this man has been a mentor and a friend of mine for many years. And today we're really going to just jump into investing in people that you lead, which is something that John does very, very well. And then understanding gaps and how we take the steps, take action on how to fill those gaps. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome John. Welcome, John.
Steve, thanks. It's great to be with you. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, John. Just want to make sure you're wearing pants. Yes,
I am. Hey, before we get started, let me just tell you that Mary Jo and I are both extremely proud of you. And, I mean that, right? But I'm just really proud of all that you accomplished. Great with the podcast and your new role up there. And I hope you and Sherry are very successful returning back to that location. And I just love to see all the stuff that you've been up to the last couple of years. It does my heart good to see it. Well deserved.
I appreciate that, John. And that really leads me right into something that I wanted to say to you and into the podcast itself. And that's the investing in people portion. So I'm sure I've told you this before. If not, I think it's in one of your books, but you stepped in my life at a time where I was about ready to leave the maintenance and reliability field. I was sick and tired of it. I was tired of getting beat down. I was really just sick and tired of, having that role and that career. And you saw something in me when we worked together and really invested in me, poured a lot into me. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about, not only that event, but I've seen you invest in other people like Eric Foreman, for example, and others along the line. So I guess just starting out, what is it that you see in people that helps you decide to make that decision to invest in someone?
Yeah, that's a good question. I want to go back real quick if I could, because I did hear the comment that you just made about you and I and our relationship. I heard it in your great podcast with Roy Huffman, which was just a tremendous podcast. I really enjoyed that. So, I think I think you would start with what you don't see in somebody, if you'd allow me to kind of expand on that.
Oh, yeah.
What I don't see, or I feel like I don't see, or not that I don't hear it, but you don't see sort of preconditions. It's not like somebody said, oh, hey, when you meet Steve, you got to watch out for this. Or if you meet Eric, hey, be on the lookout for this. So you don't walk in expecting somebody to be that. I'm not saying I ever heard that. I'm saying you don't walk in thinking, you don't walk in thinking someone's got strikes against them that they don't have. But I wonder if you would look back on our relationship and ask honestly, if it really just boils down to at some point, me believing in you and then giving you the opportunity to prove me right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. It's an interesting way to look at it, right? You start out on the positive scale rather than looking for the gaps in the person. You're really looking at, okay, I believe that you're here.
Yep.
So that does make a lot of sense.
Well, I mean, obviously you didn't get to be a maintenance manager because you were doing everything wrong. You'd gotten to that role for some demonstration. Back in the old days when I had, hair and a 29-inch waist, back in those I realized that was the last century. But, sometimes the maintenance manager was just the biggest SOB in the department, right? Or the smartest guy. And Steve, I wonder, I don't know that you've mentioned in the podcast, but maybe just a real quick reflection back on how you and I know each other. So when I went to work at the plant where you're at, I came in as the maintenance or the plant engineer, and you were the maintenance manager that was there, right?
Yep.
And so you were going to work for me. And then and we had an awesome team, right? Brian was the plant manager. It was me, it was you, it was Troy, it was Connie, and it was Jack. Remember? We had that team. Yep. And Martin was the operations manager. And I didn't know he was going to be the plant manager. I probably shouldn't have wrote him so hard had I known that. But it was a really great team, right? And then by virtue of just you doing some incredible things, you got sort of temporarily assigned up to Lincoln as a plant engineer. You impressed them. You got that job full time. Then you worked for Farmland and then Smithfield Corporate, and you developed some people who I know, right? You developed some great people. And now you're back as the plant manager of the plant that you and I met at, right?
Yeah, it was destined to be.
Yeah. So, I don't know if you remember this, but think about all those, years ago when we were working together. The very first thing that became obvious to me is you as the plant maintenance manager, you didn't have your own office. Do you remember that? You were out in the bullpen with the guys. Do you remember that? And I had that office.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't a very good office, but it was the only office we had with the door you could close. And I thought to myself, a maintenance manager has to have an office because he's got to bring people in. Supervisors, technicians have those not so pleasant conversations. Do you remember what I did, Steve? I said, Steve, take this office, right? And I'll find a place. Do you remember that?
Yep.
And then, so I went up on the hill. I don't know if they still call it the hill, but we found a little office and got some furniture and got a little table and sort of laminated some maps. Remember that? We'd have like a staff meeting every day. And I made a conscious decision. I don't know if you ever thought about, why did John do this? But every time we had our daily little staff meeting, I always deferred to you if there was a question from Troy, Connie, or Jack. Because I thought the person who needs to be seen as the maintenance and reliability leader is not me, John Ross. It's Steve Baumgartner. I need him to be the guy. And you stepped up. There was never a time. By the way, Steve, I never told you what to say. I never told you how to counsel someone. I never turned a wrench. I never did any of that. It's simply like I just said before. I gave you, everything that I felt that was absent. I believed in you, and then I gave you a chance to prove me right, and you didn't fail. And by the way, if you take that approach to anybody and they don't come through, it's one of two things. It's either can't or won't, right? Once can't is a capability, and we can figure that out. Training, conversations. Won't is an attitude, and that's to close the door and let's talk about it. But you also have to make sure that your people are set up to be successful, right? Because I have a better day when you have a better day. When Connie has a better day, Jack has a better day. Lord knows when Troy has a better day, we all have a good day, right? Because you know him, everything's about to blow up kind of thing.
Oh, true story.
That was just a great team all around. Just a great team.
Agreed. So one thing that I will pull out of there too is, I was trying to think as you were speaking that, no, you never did tell me what to do or how to do it, but you always asked a question, right? So if I could always tell if maybe I was going a little bit off the rails or whatever, because Steve, did you think of this? Right. That was your, but it was always a question. And what I really appreciated about that was that you allowed me to think through it. You just gave me a guardrail, right, to bounce up against.
Well, it sounded better than, are you out of your mind? I thought I'd just pose it. Hey, do you remember, are we allowed to name names here? I don't know what your podcast rules are, but.
Well, maybe just keep it to first names.
Yeah. So you remember Jason, right? The day shift, cook side supervisor. Remember his first name was really Mike, but he went by Jason.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that? So years later, after I, was back in consulting, he called me and said, "Hey, John, hey, you remember every time we were up in your office, you were talking about the P to F curve, and mean time between failure and all that stuff. I said, yeah, I remember that. And he said, you think you could tell me that again, and this time I'll write it down? And I said, well, sure, Mike or Jason. I said, now that I'm a consultant, it'll cost you $1,000. He said, what if I just buy you lunch? And so we met out for lunch and had a great conversation, and I kind of shared all that stuff with him again. But that's a mark of leadership too, isn't it, Steve, that you share things?
Oh, 100%.
And I hope that your listeners will take away from my earlier conversation about our history and sort of the things you went on. See, a leader could take it personal that you've had all these advancements and things, and it might eclipse the old sensei, so to speak. But I came out of the military. It was literally a badge of honor when your guys got promotions, when your guys got medals, your guys got like really awesome assignments or accomplished things. Because again, I didn't do any of that work for you, but if I created an environment by where you could find your footing and your niche and your path, in some way I was contributing. And really what we all hope to be, I would hope as professionals, is to be a net contributor. Like when I leave, I hope I've left more behind than I took, right? I've contributed to our cause, our industry, maintenance and reliability.
Yep. So I would also say that that's the mark of being an adult, right? When you start
yeah, I guess so.
more than you're consuming. So,
right.
I mean, you could take that a couple different ways. So I guess the flip side of that, right, is have you ever came to a point in time when you've decided not to invest in someone, or you don't believe that they're going to meet the bar coming out of the gate, or do you give that opportunity to everybody that you meet?
Yeah, at the risk of having a long laundry list of vices and things I'm not good at, I did get a black mark on an evaluation from my boss, who was the plant manager when I worked at the steel mill. And here's the black, I'm not making that up. This is John, excellent, except for this one thing. You don't know when to give up on somebody. Now, I'm not saying that as my biggest vice is I just care too much. That's like on a job interview, right? So Eldon, who was my boss, he said, you don't know when to give up with somebody, because there was a particular maintenance supervisor, his name was George, and I just held on to this guy. This guy had been in jail. This guy had, spousal issues. And I'm like, Eldon, let's give him one more chance. Anyway, I finally had to let the guy go. I'm doing air quotes, because he got kicked out of Canada on a business trip for hitting a bartender with a beer pitcher, or the bouncer rather, with a beer pitcher. And so the beer pitcher is made out of plastic. George is drunk. He hits this bouncer, 400-pound bouncer, in the head with this thing. He gets beat to a pulp, and when I say kicked out of Canada, I imagine they literally tossed him over, the border. And my boss, Eldon, said, I think it's time to get rid of George. I said, I have no leg to stand on. He's out of there. But, sometimes it's, Steve, sometimes it's because it takes different things for different people, right? Sometimes somebody just wants to be listened to, or they want to rationalize a decision. And so you're there listening, right? And you might offer some, hey, you think about this, you think about that. Sometimes you realize that they don't have a skill that they need, and you're like, hey, wait a minute, it's within my power to do something about that. Sometimes they, and by the way, too, Steve, you've seen this because you've been around. Sometimes when someone has some performance issues, and I've even been talking to supervisors, sometimes it's not work related, it's home related, right? They got a really sick kid, they got a marriage that might have some trouble. It's oftentimes financial. It's things that are personal. They don't want to talk about it, and I can understand that. But I hope that we don't ever have a society where we just give up on people. Because even if it's hey, Steve, maybe supervision isn't your thing, but you obviously need some assistance. Let me see what I could do. But if the people are suffering and the job's suffering, you got to step in and do what you got to do. But I don't think you ever give up on people. But by the way, a lot of people sometimes self-identify, because maintenance supervision is tough. I mean, right? Look, I'm talking, right? It can be difficult. Sometimes people go, John, I just don't have the fight anymore, right? It's been beaten out of me. So that's kind of where I found you, I guess, as you're describing it. You were, and see, what a shame that would have been, right? With your talent and capability. And think of all the people who have benefited from being in what's the word I'm looking for, your orbit, so to speak, that have benefited because the people that you worked with at corporate, your team, have really, really benefited, went on to get certifications and do great things. And wouldn't that have been a shame had I walked in and you walked out? I walked in the front door, you walked out the back door.
Oh, agreed 100%. And it's amazing how we touch people's lives, right? And never let them know. I mean, you touch my life like that. I've had the same experience with others. I have one of my former employees. We switch roles, so that's why the former employees. But she just reached out to me the other day and was thanking me for some leadership things that I had done in her career that prepared her to better for her personal life, which I thought was pretty interesting. So yeah, it's amazing all those little lollipop moments that can come up that would have never been there if one thing wouldn't have happened. So I'm going to have, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm just going to say that's kind of the richness of life, isn't it? Being engaged and being there and contributing.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So has there ever been a time when it's been to your detriment that you've not given up on someone?
Well, I by that you mean has anyone kind of drug me down? I don't know that's ever happened. I did mention that it's just hard for me to, there's no value because it's a dog eat dog world. Here's what I hate. I hate for a guy or a gal to lose their job. Right. I was at a client site on Monday, storeroom. And I'm in the storeroom. I'm in the storeroom manager's office, and he shares the office with the planner. And so when I got to the storeroom guy says, "John, we can't go to my office right now." I said, "Oh, why? How come?" "Oh, they just told me not to go in there for a while." And so then we went in the office after lunch, and so I'm seeing his office in the storeroom, and I go, "Hey, who sits over here?" "Oh, that's the planner." And I said, "Where is he?" "Yeah, that's why I couldn't go to my office this morning. They were firing him."
Oh,
walking them out the door and writing them like, and like holiday, and I'm like, well, what sleeping on the job is what the problem was. And I thought, how did it get to that? Yeah. That a guy's losing his job, sleeping on the job. I mean, that seems like such a, 20th century reason to fire somebody. How did it get to that? Of course, I don't know if it's like 17 verbal warnings and 3 written warnings and a suspension, and then the guy got walked. But I haven't had a situation. And again, what's interesting, Stephen, again, you and I are parallel in the sense that we've been around for a while, right? People, if you invest in people, have faith in them, listen to them, give them what they need to be successful. I was going to say you'd be surprised what people can do. But you're not surprised because they can do it.
Right.
And it's amazing what people can do. And I tell you what, Steve, when someone accomplishes something that they didn't even think they could, but somebody believes in them and they accomplish something, the pride that they feel, the self-accomplishment, the lifting of their heart, you cannot simulate that. That comes from accomplishment. That comes from reaching a goal. That comes from doing something. But you maybe if you're just persevering because your boss thinks you can do it, right. And then you do. I'll tell you what. That's. I mean, they don't have a drug that simulates that. I don't think that's awesome.
No, I agree, and it's an amazing mindset, really, when it comes down to it. And I'm analyzing all of my direct staff right now, and thinking about, have I really set them up to where I believe that they can succeed at their jobs, right? Because as humans, for whatever reason, we're wired to, look at negatives first, and then, we might bump into a positive here. But the way that you take it, it's, you start at that different level, that different mindset of being positive, and knowing that they can achieve it. So,
well, and it could be the military, I guess, but you know what it is? It's a classic survival trait, I guess. I mean, think about this. We're stranded on a desert island, right? You and I.
yep.
And so we don't know how long we're going to be there. So we may be there for the rest of our lives, right? We don't know. So we could do one of two things. Let's talk about what we don't have, right? What we don't have, or let's see what we do have, right? And so the approach is, let's take stock of what we do have. And let's say, for example, where you work right now, every single thing that your facility, your people, since you're the plant manager, every single thing they need to be successful exists in that plant now. Everything. All they need from corporate is the funding. That's it. I don't need corporate to come down and solve ammonia vacuum pump that's leaking. I don't need them to solve a issue on a slicer or a drain or something, right? Everything you need's in there. And so as a leader, you let your people know everything we need is here, including the brain power, the willpower to get it done. Now it's just a matter of like, what do we got? Not what are we missing? Because duct tape ain't going to help us if we ain't got any duct tape. And so it's the approach. And you know what, Steve? You and I and your listeners, we're professional problem solvers. That's what we are. We're professional problem solvers. We solve problems all day long. And at some point, you're going to get to, what do we have to work with? I just suggest we start with that.
Right.
What do we have to work with? And by the way, that could be, I have an interest. I have a curiosity. I have a certain set of skills. I'm going to do my Liam. Who's that? I got a certain set of skills. I will find you. Who's that actor? Right?
Liam Neeson, yep.
Liam Neeson, right? I got a particular set of skills. I will find you. But hey, can I point out something real quick? I meant to say at the beginning. It's ironic that you've got this podcast. I don't know if you ever knew this. For your listeners who aren't watching this on a video, but I'm holding up my dissertation. This is my PhD dissertation. This is it right here. And this is the title: Leadership Development for Engineers and Technical Professionals, a case study. So about, 20 years ago, 18 years ago, when I was putting this together, I noticed there's a complete lack of leadership in the skilled trades and the technical fields. And what we're doing, Steve, is we're training people to be great managers, time managers, managing budgets, managing schedules, managing production.
Yep.
But nobody's leading, right? Nobody's creating. Nobody's innovating. I'm not saying nobody is, but we're not. And do you really teach that, or is it sort of innate to people? But my conclusion was, we better get busy, or we're going to end up with a lot of technical leaders who don't know how to lead.
Yep. And that's even hard to find anymore, just getting that technical leader. So one thing I want to go back to is the problem solving thing. I'd almost challenge that a little bit. In leadership, I'm not really sure that I'm a problem solver. I like to consider myself a facilitator of solutions rather than a problem solver myself. So what I mean by that is that, sometimes I'm that person who needs to get the creative juices going, but I need my people to be those problem solvers, right?
Yeah, I think you misunderstood. I think you misunderstood me, Steve. I don't mean that you have to come up with the solution, but you can't get through a single day. You can't get through a single day without addressing a problem, can you? They're calling you before you leave the home to come to work. In fact, Steve, if you could somehow seal yourself in your office, take the phone off the hook, not answer a note under the door, and sneak out of there without ever talking to a single person, you're going to get home and Sherry's going to say, "What do you want for dinner?" And now you got that problem to deal with, right? You probably end up chicken nuggets or something.
Thousands of decisions for sure.
Yeah, so what keeps you from having to literally come up with the solution yourself is engaging the people. We are professional problem solvers. What do we got to work with? What's the problem? How big is the problem? Is it really a problem we need to tackle now, based on priorities? And so we're making these kind of decisions, like this. And we got to get really good at it. If you're a professional problem solver, and you are, our approach ought to be to go hunt for problems. to go seek them out while they're babies, infants in the cradle. We're going to be the Van Helsing of problem solving. We're going to kill those things in the cradle, drive a stake through their heart, because we're like vampire slayers, right? Van Helsing. We're going to hunt down problems. So if you think about that approach, when your people come to work today, engaged, excited, and willing to take on the problems, guys, what's keeping us from being successful today? Well, we got this situation. Well, you three guys, go out and kill it. That's really what you're sending them out for. And I was telling Mary Jo, I said, you know, one thing I just thought about, Steve, here, I just thought about this. You don't want the people that work for you, your sort of lieutenants, if you will, you don't want them to have a worry or a care in the world. You want them to go home excited about tomorrow, excited about the plan that they're part of, excited about the vision, their part, and they can't wait to get to work, to try out that new thing or to have that conversation of growth with their people. As a leader, you don't want your people to have, I don't mean I don't want them to think about things, but I don't want you to worry about stuff. I want you to be excited about what we're doing tomorrow. John, why do we have to go home? Well, because they got to be in the office. You got to leave, right?
Started. You better finish it.
Yeah. Different way of looking at it, right? Let's get excited about solving these problems because we're professional problem solvers. Let's get really good at it. That's
100%. And I think that ties, everybody wants to win, right? But
yes.
If they don't get to play the team, they're not going to win.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's that feeling, right? And you want to be on a winning team, right? Nobody wants to be on their 13th year of a rebuilding, like I've been rebuilding for 13 years. I'm ready to have a winning season. That comes from a Dallas Cowboy fan, by the way.
No, I thought maybe you were picking on my Cornhuskers there for a second.
No, hey, not after our last game.
Well, now that we've talked quite a bit about that, there's a few takeaways I'm going to grab out of there, of course, and that's, how can I reset my mindset to think about making sure that the people who work in my care knowing that they're fully capable and being able to achieve that. So that's a huge takeaway for me. So as we conclude that, I'd like to really talk about these certifications that you've started. And we can start off talking about, what are they and who are they for? But what I really want to get down to is I've really seen that over time. And I remember the first time that I talked to you about a storeroom outside of work, right? And it was when you were consulting. And man, I don't know if I've ever seen you that excited. And then I thought to myself, why in the hell is he so excited about a storeroom? Nobody cares about the storeroom. So explain to us how you just identified those gaps and now how you're filling them.
Yeah, so Steve, I can try not to make this sound like an infomercial, but as I mentioned before I came out of the military, I was a flight line aircraft maintenance officer. And all the planes that I worked on were literally every plane I worked on was built in the 50s or the very early 60s, and they weren't making those planes anymore. But we had the spare parts, right? Because you can imagine the B-52 fleet grounded because we don't have some little plastic union or something, right, that isn't made anymore. And so it was just sort of, as a flight line maintenance officer, I always ran the storm because that was part of the sort of the flight line maintenance. And you never thought about spare parts because it was just always going to be there, or there's some guy in a Pentagon, some colonel making sure that part was going to be there forever. I got my first civilian job, and lo and behold, that wasn't real life. In fact, we didn't actually have a storeroom at all. I don't mean like a storeroom that wasn't worth much. We literally did not have a room that was a storeroom. We didn't have like a junk drawer. Everybody had their own stash. And I got a consultant that came down from Chicago. His name was Jack. And Jack came down and we set up a philosophy and a vision and a mission, just like I teach in class. And he said, John, at some point we're going to have a storeroom. So my boss was named Mike, probably one of the best bosses I've ever had. I told Mike, I need a storeroom. He says, how big? I said, this big. He said, how much money do you need? I told him. He goes, go tell the operations manager you're taking 300 square foot of his property where he was just storing molds. Just pick out the choicest property. This guy was the vice president. And so, make it so, number one, make it so, like on Star Trek. And so I hired this, of course, it was a union plant. So I had to hire the senior, whoever put in for it, a lady named Kathy, she was clock number 3, like the other 2 guys had died. And so Kathy was like the senior person in the whole plant. She was there, when Paul Revere started it in 1801. So Kathy comes over. She's 7'4". She's the meanest looking woman you ever saw in your life. Perfect for a storeroom. She welded herself in there and never left for like 6 years. And she created this incredible storeroom. And so before that, we couldn't get any parts, right? And then after that, we always seemed to have exactly what we needed. And I thought, how come we don't institutionalize that? How come that, look, if it's the best practice, why isn't it our common practice, right? And so I just became a real champion of the storm because I found out wherever I went, you could have the best preventive and predictive maintenance, the best planning and scheduling in the world. You're not getting anything done if you don't have that little plastic union. It just ain't happening.
Yep.
And so about 5 years ago, I created this idea for a storm certification, one for the managers or the salaried folks, the supervisor, manager, whatever that title of that person is, but salaried. And then also one for technicians, the associates, clerks, whatever they're called, and the hourly folks. And I presented this to a company, a big consulting company. And 5 times I went to them, 5 times they turned me down. And so after that, I said, I'm just going to start this myself. Right? I think I got enough cachet and enough name recognition and enough education and notoriety, if you will, that, when Dr. Ross says it, best practice, here's my sources, it kind of means something. And here's the thing, Steve. So it's a course, like a 4-day course. Then there's like 4 homework assignments that you have to take with one-on-one guidance from me and a test that you have to pass. So when you take this certification course, you darn well know how to run a storeroom. Absolutely, right. Because you've proven it to me, and I'm a pretty tough customer. And on the Certified Professional Reliability Engineer, there's a CRE program, but you just have to take a test. I'm like, no. If you're going to be a reliability engineer with my certification, you're going to take a class, you're going to take a 5-day learning lab hands-on of all these technologies, hands-on. You're going to have homework and you're going to pass a test. And this is like a little obstacle course. And but you're going to be able to do exactly what the program says you'll be able to do. We've got to have, again, we don't have people that can do it. Let's build a program where the people have to demonstrate objectively they know how to do it. And then you wear this badge, like pin a medal on your chest. It means something. It's not a participation trophy, right? Or everybody gets a ribbon for coming to work. I'm not making this up. By the way, let me just say something real quick. I'm not making it up. I was at a client site weeks ago. They hired a guy. He showed up, did a great job. He didn't show up the next day. And I said, well, how come? He goes, well, we called and said, hey, where are you? You're supposed to be here. The guy said, 2 days in a row? I mean, it was like I'm supposed to show up every day? Man, you guys work hard.
Yeah,
but
okay.
So I said, let's create some certification programs that have some real meat in them, right? Some real teeth, that when the people have this, letters after their name, these guys came from like the best school. I don't mean to sound that way, but you know what I'm talking about. They really went tried or fire forged, if you'll allow me to use that phrase, right? Anyway, they're great programs. They've been very well received, and I'm just very pleased. And way, our storeroom folks, one guy had an ROI for the price of it, the cost of it. 3 days, he went home and in 3 days, he found enough sort of like savings that paid for the class. I think that's pretty amazing.
Oh, that is awesome. And that's really how all classes should be in today's world, right?
I think so.
Find the ROI. So, going back to, kind of my surprise when you started talking about storerooms, I understand at this point how critical they are. However, in today's age, we continue to pay people under what they're worth. We want to throw a couple pennies to be a storeroom clerk when they have a massive job, right? We've talked about it 1,000 times. You go up and talk to the administrative assistant in a building, and you got to fill out something, a triplicate for a dang paper clip. But our storerooms stand wide open. The person who's supposed to be manning it is playing on the computer. You just go, yeah, get whatever you want. Why do you think there's that lack of, I don't know, security, lack of ownership in storerooms, lack of energy around it, I guess?
Well, I think it probably can come back to leadership, right? Which is kind of the theme of your broadcast. So again, harkening back to my military days, B-52s, right? So those airplanes, hundreds of millions of dollars, and obviously these are nuclear capable. And there's a red line around them. There's a red line. There's no fence. There's a red line. And if you cross that red line in a spot where you're not supposed to cross it, don't be surprised if you get shot in the head or a knee in the neck, right? And a M16 butt across your face. If you want to go into that area, you got to cross where it's open and show your credentials and stuff. So you don't really need storeroom security if people will just stop screwing with the storeroom, right? Don't go in there. Don't cross that line. You have no business. And so the leader has a responsibility, Steve, to set the expectations. And the way the process works is the leader has to first be part of the team that assesses the current situation. Let's do an assessment, honest, get on the scale. Don't dial it back because you had a candy bar at lunch. It's, don't take off those 10 pounds. Look at the scale and go, we got some work to do, right?
Right.
We suck, right? And here's our score. But you can't leave it there. You got to set a vision. Guys, this is not where we're stopping. We're passing through this number. Here's the vision. Here's the lighthouse. That's where we're heading. Once you get the team, again, engagement, they agree where we are. They have energy and excitement about where they're going. And then you can set the expectation. People want to have, I think people inherently want to have their boss have expectations for them. Steve, can you imagine if when I got there, I said, all right, Troy, Connie, Jack, we're gonna be world class, this, that, and other thing, except for you, Steve. I mean, can you imagine that, right? It's like, guys, here's where we're going, right? Because we're all part of the team. We did everything as a team. We talked about everything, even if it wasn't Connie related. She was in the meeting. And you set the expectations. Once you set the expectation, then we agree on how we're going to measure it, KPIs and metrics. But a storeroom clerk who's sitting there playing, well, I don't know if they're really playing video games, but is less than engaged. You show me that, and I'll show you a leader who has not set the expectations for that person and reminds them every day how critical they are. Because, Steve, the equipment in our plant, like your plant's not just slicing, spiral cutting ham or injecting ham or smoking ham or whatever you guys are doing. It's printing paychecks.
Agreed.
It's printing paychecks. The guy in that storeroom has the ink, the paper, and the parts for the paycheck printing machine. Those are very valuable in printing paychecks. And you need to remind the guy. And by the way, the guy's got to get engaged, right? He's got to be part of the conversation to stay kind of up and excited. And remember what I talked about. Is he excited about coming to work tomorrow and putting plan B into place, or the third part of plan A? Is he excited to come to work because he can't wait to do that new thing that you guys have been talking about? Right. And if he's not, you can't expect a $15 an hour guy or whatever they're getting paid nowadays, right? The leader's got to make him excited, and he wants to feel relevant. I could be wrong. By the way, let me just tell your listeners, half of what I say may be BS, but the other half's pretty good, so pay attention to some of it, right? I think there's some value there. I thought I'd before you did, right?
Going back to when you were explaining that vision and where we were going, you were really, really good at that, right? You got up in front of the whiteboard. You're an excellent teacher. Good at connecting the dots, making it simple. Not everybody has that capability. So I look at my current role as a plant manager, and I have 7 direct reports. Each one of them has a functional area. How would you say one of those people isn't that motivator or doesn't know how to articulate that vision properly? So you have one functional area. How would you go about getting that one functional area steered in the right direction if that person just is not of the same mindset as us, I guess, or being able to sell that product?
It depends, I guess, is it a lack of charisma? Because I think you'd probably agree. And I realize, and I don't want your listeners to think I'm all full of myself, but sometimes I have to say I because I'm talking about my practice. But
Yep.
I feel, because, by the way, I wasn't born as a natural speaker. I took Toastmasters and really tried to hone. But you got to have maybe a natural charisma, but not everybody has that. But you know that old saying, Steve, is I think you may have used it in a podcast, but are people born into leadership, or do you rise to the occasion? Like the war breaks out and you're thrust into this leadership role. I don't think leadership is intuitive in the sense that we all instantly know when to jump into action, right? Like you're scared, or you don't know, or you don't have a lot of self-confidence. And a lot of people have jumped into action and gotten killed, right? They're like, I'll lead the charge, and you're the first guy, right? But I do think that leadership is, although it's not intuitive, like you don't know when to jump in kind of thing, I think it is organic, because everybody in some role, some capacity, you're a leader of some sort. You might not think you are, but you're like help the Cub Scouts in the Pinewood Derby, or you're a church leader, or you're at home, right? You're part of a team. You and your wife, or maybe you and your husband or something, are a team. And so if you're looking for one of your subordinates or one of your functional leaders to have the same leadership style as you, you're going to be very disappointed. And but here's what's interesting. You know what the answer isn't? The answer isn't for you to jump over them and lead their team for them. The answer isn't to send them to a leadership school because they just don't seem to be able to speak in public, right? I mean, you've heard Elon Musk speak. Is he the most powerful public speaker you've ever heard? No. I mean, he gets his point across. You aren't riveted to the screen waiting for him to launch a rocket or a car or Twitter into the universe or something. The point is, can the person describe where they're trying to lead people to? Bill, can you tell me where it is you're trying to lead the people to? And more importantly, do the people know that? Were they in on the, hey guys, let's sit down and talk about this great mystical place where we're going to be in 6 months. And then let's get there and let's have a celebration. And then where are we going to go 6 months? And let's have a celebration. The people have to be engaged in where they're going, or else they're the victim of where you're leading them to. I mean, Moses didn't tell the Israelites, oh, by the way, we're going to wander around the desert for 40 years. He kind of left that part out. Moses, where are we going to get food? It's going to fall from heaven. Really? I've never seen that happen before. What are we going to drink? Water from rocks. Really? That happens a lot? Like, has ever? You're getting your guidance from a burning bush or a tornado? I mean, seems like we'd have seen this before if this was a natural thing, right?
Right.
And so the people are more likely to do something if they're engaged in the development of it. But here's the rule. When you get people together, say, guys, we're going to come up to a consensus. We can't do 7 things. We're going to leave this room with one plan, and we all have to be behind it. Steve, it may be your plan. John, it might be your plan. Bill, it might be yours, or a combination. But we can only have one path. And I need a leader that doesn't have to be the most charismatic, doesn't have to be the best speaker, but they have to have a sincere interest in the team being successful. And Steve, you know this more than anybody. People will look past your words. They may even look past your actions, and they see your sincerity. I was telling Mary Jo, I said, there's 3 people that I think are, as far as leaders, that, boy, I wish I could be like them. Here they are, no particular order. You, Roy Huffman, I'm going to use his last name, and a guy named Brian Somlik who worked at the steel mill with me. They're people, that's you, Roy, and Brian. Their people want to work for them. They want to perform. That doesn't sound right, but you know what I mean. They want to show and give effort and be engaged and be part of their team because they see that the leader's heart is sincere. Right. Steve, I mean, think about this. You're the plant manager. Are you honestly the best person? You know how to do everybody's job better than they know how to do it?
No.
And by the way, you'd be a fool to think that you are. In fact, you're better off not, because then you're starting to tell them how to do their job. Guys, the reason I got this job, is because somebody saw something in me. But I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to have the best plant in the entire company. What's that going to take? All of you, me, and everybody else. It's for us to realize that there's nothing that we need other than a budget from headquarters and a mission to be successful. We're in absolute control of our destiny, and people see the sincerity. And sometimes you get a leader that's trying too hard, and they're not really a hard ass, but they're coming across as one, and they don't play that very well. But you don't need your people to like you either, in terms of you don't need to be the best friend. But I need them to understand where we're going. And I would ask a leader, it's a long answer, I guess. I'd ask somebody in the scenario you gave me, do your people know where you're trying to lead them? And were they engaged in developing that location, that space in the universe? And if not, that's where I'd start.
Yeah, that's a good point. You got to paint that house up on the mountain 3 miles away, what color shutters it's got on it. And then they also got to be engaged with the march, right?
Steve, they're either engaged or they're the victim. That's your only two choices. And one of the things that you and I do, and the others I mentioned, and I think good leaders, I guess, you take away the victimhood, right? There's no victims here. There are no victims. You're not a victim of the supply. Maintenance isn't the victim of production schedule. Production is not the victim of maintenance. We're not the victim of, the USDA, right? We're not the victim.
Right. Every bit of that is within our control. Yeah.
And if it's not, doesn't say something else? Now you need to ask somebody for whatever you need to solve that, right?
Yeah. So you mentioned Elon Musk. I'm hoping I don't lose half my listeners.
The point I was making is he's not the most dynamic speaker, right? He's not Tony Robbins, for crying out loud.
Agreed.
But he paints a picture where people want to be. He paints this. He can get you to see it, right? And by the way, it's not insincere, right? That's the point I was making about naming some folks I think are very sincere. I think that's a real skill of a leader, is to be able to get the team to develop the place where they want to go. And like they're excited to get there. They can't wait to go to work tomorrow to do that, right? And then you celebrate those things.
Great.
Yeah.
So the celebration part too, how many times do we forget that in business, right? We set these goals, we achieve them, and we're like, yeah, we did it. Okay, on to the next thing, right? So we don't do a proper celebration a lot of the time. So,
well, certainly not in maintenance, but I've been saying lately in a lot of my classes, sometimes in maintenance, the day gets away from us. Plant's down, we lost production, the maintenance manager's getting yelled at. It's just a bad day. If that ever happens to you, and by the way, it doesn't have to be maintenance. It could be production, could be finance, could be whatever. If that ever happens, buy ice cream sandwiches for your people. Guys, come in here. This one got away from us. Guess what? We got another day tomorrow. Have an ice cream sandwich. No one was ever in a bad mood because they ate an ice cream sandwich. I mean the cheap ones too, like where the cookie comes off on your finger. Not like the really fancy Blue Bunny, $5 a piece ones, but the 25-cent ones. Agreed. Just buy ice cream sandwiches, man.
So you're gonna love this, but down where the cafeteria used to be.
Oh, used to be. Okay.
Yeah. So there's another building out here where the break rooms are at, but that became a training center, and we actually have an ice cream freezer in there, John.
Oh, I like that. I'm coming to visit.
It is beautiful.
Did you ever get a bathroom on the first floor? That's the important thing.
Well, it's no. Nope, still haven't got that one to pass. But on the other building, yes, it's on the first floor.
That's good.
So going back to not being able to have all the answers for all the different departments and all that, it's been very interesting since I came from a 20-year career with this company in maintenance and engineering to plant management, because I think my one superpower in the role is I can ask all the dumb questions, right? I get those out of the way. Uh, I, there's people with a lot more experience in this business and definitely in their roles than what I have. So I get to ask those stupid questions, but a lot of times it's amazing because it gets people to think about things that they haven't thought about for 20 years. Right. So it kind of brings them back down to the basics. And when you're talking about problem solving, five whys and all the other methods of problem solving, the hardest thing that I've seen in my career is that people don't think simply enough, right? They don't get to the root cause because they're always jumping to that conclusion. But in this role, I can help people get there because I can ask those stupid questions like a 3-year-old. So just wanted to call that out after you mentioned that.
Yeah, and a lot of what we do too, Steve, is I just had this discussion today. A lot of what we do is process driven, right? So when a machine breaks down, the plant manager, right, normally says the next day, who PM that last? Remember that old, who did the PM last, right? No, the question you ought to, I'm not telling you to ask this, but the question that ought to be asked is, how do we keep this from happening again? Right? I don't care who PM'd it last. Maybe it was the best PM in the world and the thing just gave up because it was its time to give up or something. But how do we keep this from happening again? What was the failure mode and what are we doing about it? And then how can we leverage that? If it was a motor, do we have any other motors in the plant? If it was a coupling that sheared, do we have any other couplings in the plant that we could leverage these gains? Steve, this goes back to making our guys professional problem solvers and thinking about it, right? Because I don't know if you know this, but I was a crash investigator for 7 years with the Air Force, right? And so you got all these crashes or an incident. It could be, dead pilots or a smoking hole in the ground or just a car ran into an airplane or something. But the question was always, how do we keep this from, what happened and how do we keep it from happening again? Because, we don't have a lot of planes and we don't want to lose pilots ever, right? We never want that to happen. And again, it's this professional, you approach the problem with this, the value of it is going to keep it from happening again. In your case, it's to keep the paycheck printing machine running longer, right? And so you're arming your people to go out and do battle. And hey, let me just say something too, Steve, about this being the smartest guy or having the answer for everything. I think you're a smart guy. I think you're very smart. But let me tell you something. You will never be smarter than you and me together. You ever thought about that? Because you haven't lived long enough and you won't live long enough to make every mistake I ever made, right? And so the value of us working together is you've got my history. And by the way, I'm not smart because I'm just smart. I don't, whatever I know is because I tried it the other way. It didn't work, right? And I found a way that did work and I can share that with you. Look, I don't know the right answer for what you're doing, but here's 3 or 4 things I've seen work. Let's see if any of that might fit the bill. And that's our approach, right? So the important thing about your little scenario is you are a team. You're a team of, what'd you say, 7 plus you, 8, right? So,
yep.
And there are hundreds of people counting on you guys to engage them, set a vision or help create a vision, set expectations, because people want to rise to the occasion of a challenge. Again, can you imagine, Steve, you stay on the bench, we don't need you, or we don't think you could do this. You don't want to be that guy.
Right.
No,
that's good.
Everybody.
Well, I know I'm keeping you from dinner, so just kind of wrap this up here. I'll give you a little bit of a chance here if you want to talk about your books or where anybody can reach out to you at, or anything along the maintenance innovator route. That would be perfectly fine.
Yeah, well, again, not turn it to infomercial, but my first book is called The Reliability Excellence Workbook from Ideas to Action. And I was at the SMRP conference in 2017 in Kansas City. And I kind of walked over to Industrial Press and I said, I want to talk to somebody about writing a book. And the lady, her name's Judy, she goes, you can talk to me. I'm the executive editor. And she said, what's your book about? And I told her, and she goes, that book needs to be written. Steve, that book is how to set up a strategy. And it starts out with, you're going to be surprised to hear this, get a team together, right? Get a team together. And it's a workbook. You go through sections and you fill in the blank. And at the end, you got this great strategy. It works every single time. And what's interesting is it ties in with my dissertation because 15, 16 years ago, I'm typing and doing term papers and things for my PhD program. And my maintenance supervisor came in. I'm in my office where I work. He comes in. His name is Todd. And Todd said, John, what are you doing here so late? I said, I'm working on a paper. He said, what's it about? And I told him. I turned around and I said, Todd, he just came in to chat because he saw my light was on. I said, Todd, I got an idea. Why don't you and I quit here and let's start a consulting company and we'll call it Maintenance Innovators. Todd's the first guy to ever hear that title. And he said, what would we do? And I said, well, I'm working on my dissertation here. And what this is let's set up a success for the maintenance and reliability effort by planning, engaging, budgeting, setting milestones, celebrating, and at the end, we all win. Like you started out, like we're interested in winning. So at Maintenance Innovators, we follow that approach. I promise you, I'm not going to come turn a wrench. I'm not going to stock a part on your shelf. I'm not going to clean a machine unless we're doing like a BEC or something. But what we're going to do is create the best maintenance and reliability programs and strategies on the planet, and we're going to engage everybody. And we may have to eat ice cream sandwiches from time to time, but it's going to be wildly successful. And anyway, it's been a very successful ride. It's a great company. The 2 books are outstanding. The second book, by the way, is Cover Your Assets, Asset Management at Your Place and at Your Pace. And it's on ISO 55000, Asset Managers. We're all asset managers, right? If the maintenance department can't explain how they're an asset to the company, they're either an expense, that's where we show up on the general ledger anyway, or worse, we're a liability. So I'm suggesting in maintenance, we get busy at proving that we're an asset and a core value driver to our business. But that's a little bit about Maintenance Innovators in the books. And the certification programs are outrageously awesome. Just the courses, you don't have to get a certification. I'm telling you guys, just the courses are awesome.
I'm excited for you on that one. I see that big old smile you got on your face.
I'm excited about it. We're gonna change the world, Steve.
That's awesome, man. I'm proud of you. Anyways, I'll go ahead and let you get back to your personal life and get some dinner in you. You know, I know you're kind of melting away there like I am, but definitely appreciate all the mentorship throughout the years. I'm sure that the listeners here are going to pick up a lot, just like I did from listening to you talk every time that we have a conversation. I appreciate it, John.
Yeah, Steve, let me just say in closing, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I appreciate those kind words. All I ever did was believe in you and then give you the chance to prove me right. And I appreciate you proving me right many times. I'm very proud of you, Steve. Very proud.
You're going to make me tear up here, John.
Well, I'm tearing up a little bit. I just really am. You've done an exceptional job. So
I appreciate that, sir.
Yeah, you bet, old friend.
So I'd like to thank all the listeners for tuning in today, the Fire Forge Leader podcast. So remember, every one of these episodes is worthless unless you put these words into some sort of action. So after the heat of the forge, shape those thoughts, quench the brain, and put these tools to use. I appreciate y'all, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Fire Forge Leader.